Okay guys, True Techno Gamer here, and I'm gonna enjoy this one for real. I'm gonna enjoy this video. I'm a little frustrated, guys. Over the past few months, really since the PS5 road to PS5 talk that Mark Cerny gave around GDC time in March, the specs have been known for the PS5, and the GPU specs at a high level have been revealed. And ever since then, and even before that, really based on leaks or whatever, but ever since then, most people seem to have this idea, somehow they have drawn the conclusion that the PS5 GPU is roughly as powerful as an RTX 2070 or maybe an RTX 2070 Super, which means that it's roughly on par with the RX 5700 XT from AMD, which is on the market today as a desktop GPU. That's about where they just figure it is, which those GPUs are not really considered high-end GPUs, even on the market today. I don't really know how they're drawing the conclusion from the data and from the specs that I've seen. And if you understand how this stuff works, there is no way that the PS5 is just only a 5700 XT or RTX 2070. I'll explain why after the intro. Okay, so let's go back. Full disclosure here. Initially, back in April, I made a post on NeoGAF, right? That I created a thread to talk about just this exact topic, and I broke down some detailed analysis that I did, just crunching some numbers, looking at current GPUs on the market to project the performance of the PS5 GPU. And most people, seem to understand what I was saying. I think I explained it fairly well. And it spawned a few pages of discussion. It was pretty cool. But I gotta put this video out here so that I can really try to disseminate it wider, because I am just so tired of hearing this. What I really want to get out of this video is, first of all, to explain very clearly how it seems very, very, very far-fetched that the PS5 GPU is only as powerful as the 5700 XT or RTX 2070. Everything we know about the PS5 GPU, everything we know, confirmed specs from AMD, from Sony, even looking at Microsoft and where the power envelope sits with the Xbox Series X, all of that points to a PS5 GPU that is severely underrated at a 5700 XT level. In fact, I will go over my detailed analysis that actually points to the PS5 GPU being at least on par with the RTX 2080 Super. If you understand how this stuff works, and God knows, if you are like a game developer and you happen to be watching this, if I'm wrong somewhere, because the only way that you can really listen to what I have to say and then say that I'm wrong is if you are a game developer or someone who actually has hands-on with the PS5 dev kit and have run through some analysis or some stress tests of your own and just confirm, like, look, we're only seeing performance levels that's roughly on par with a desktop RTX 2070 or 2070 Super or 5700 XT. You would be the authority there. Okay, I'm not going to sit here and say it. Everything I have to say is based on specs and the numbers. I'll put that out there. I do not have a PS5 dev kit. I have not run any stress tests. But if you have tested and know, that's fine. But then the next question is, and the real question that will come out of this whole discussion is, well, what's wrong? What is it about the system at the PS5 that will be bottlenecking the GPU? Because if it is only a 5700 XT, it can only be because it's being bottlenecked by something severely. And it would be really interesting to know what that is. Because here's the thing. Everyone that I've heard that has said that the PS5 is just an RTX 2070 or 5700 XT, I have never heard anyone actually explain how they are deducing that from the actual specs or from the data. They're just throwing it out there, okay? The only actual data point that I have heard, and Digital Foundry did use this, is based on that Gears of War 5 Xbox Series X demo that Microsoft showed when they first, did their Series X unveiling, which Digital Foundry was a part of. And in there, Coalition showed, like a sample of the first level in the beginning of the game running on Series X. And the performance was roughly equatable to an RTX 2080. The problem with that Gears of War 5 demo, and this was said by the Coalition at the time, was that they only spent a few weeks, I think they said like 3 weeks maybe, of getting the game up and running on Series X. It wasn't optimized. They didn't spend any time on it. They just took the code, plopped it on Series X willy-nilly, and was like, wow, we're already matching the 2080 here. But if they take some time to optimize that thing, it's going to be way above a 2080, guaranteed, okay? That's the first thing. The second thing, though, is that they also admitted that the Series X version had features, graphical features and effects that even the PC on ultra settings did not have, meaning that the workload was harder, more difficult. It's not an apples-to-apples comparison now, right? Ultra settings on PC with Gears of War 5 is not apples-to-apples to the Series X version and what they were running. In fact, the Series X version had enhanced effects, meaning that the performance would be lower. I don't care what graphics card it is, right? You have more complexity to your scene, the performance is going to get lower. So what they saw with that extra effects matched a 2080 already on a PC with no optimization. Now, if they had PC equivalent specs that would be farther lower, it probably automatically would have been closer to our RTX 2080 Super, at least. And I don't know, all the different effects and what the delta is and what the impact is, of course. It's entirely possible that it already was like 2080 Super level or somewhere between 2080 Super and 2080 Ti. Again, with 10 more months of optimization, they can get the enhanced version with those new features matching a 2080 Super, if not a 2080 Ti. Okay, now let's start by looking at the PS5 specs. Let's just review this real quick. Let's just look at the GPU specs. We know several key things. We know that it is based on RDNA 2 graphics engine from AMD, which, by the way, has not even been officially revealed by AMD and is not out. There's no consumer product on the PC side either that uses RDNA 2 as of yet. All we have is RDNA 1. Now that's a key point here, and I'm gonna break that down, okay? But we know that it's based on RDNA 2. We know that the frequency is 2.23 gigahertz, okay? We know that it uses 36 CUs. We know that it the system has 448 gigabytes per second of bandwidth, and it uses 16 gigabytes of memory on a 256-bit memory bus. The immediate thing that we can deduce that makes this possible to make an actual comparison and projection of the PS5 GPU is that all of those specs from the actual configuration of the GPU matches an existing card exactly. A card that is currently on the market, it matches it exactly. And that card is, in fact, AMD's RX 5700. Okay? Now, let's review those specs at a high level. We know that the RX 5700 is 36 CUs. If we look down, we see that the memory interface is also 256 bits, and that the max memory bandwidth is also 448 gigabytes per second exactly. So, same GPU configuration with two key differences. Number one, the PS5 GPU is actually, based on the game frequency, 35% faster than the 5700. So one way to look at this is that the PS5 GPU is a 5700, in hardware that is extremely overclocked by 35%, which is an extreme overclock, right? The second key difference, though, is that they're not the same architecture. The 5700 is using AMD's RDNA 1, first generation RDNA architecture. The PS5 GPU is using RDNA 2 architecture. Now this is a key point, okay? Because different architectures can be way more efficient. Now, if you've been following my channel at all, you may have seen I have a host of videos trying to explain teraflops and how to use teraflops effectively as a measurement and why it really isn't an effective measurement. And you can look at that video. I'll link it here. If you haven't seen it, check it out. But one thing that's the key takeaway there is that you cannot generally compare teraflops directly, especially between architectures. In other words, the 5700 uses RDNA 1. If this GPU was, which it is, max frequency is 8 teraflops roughly, 8 teraflops of that does not equal the same as 8 teraflops of RDNA 2, which the PS5 and Xbox Series X use. What I did in my analysis, and I'm not again going to break it down completely here, but here's the highlights. What I basically did was look at the 5700 as a reference, okay? Because we know the GPU is roughly the same, minus those two differences, clock speed and architecture, RDNA 1 versus RDNA 2. The clock speed we can account for, right? So we can look at, and again, I can see clear as day that it's mathematically 35%. Now, for the sake of argument, I'm going to round down to 30% just to be a little bit more conservative. So for now on, I'm going to use this term 30% in terms of the direct clock speed advantage that the PS5 has, even though it's a little bit more and based on AMD's typical frequency for the 5700. But based on the max frequency, it's closer to 30%. I'll just be conservative and use 30%. Right? Now, the question is, how much of an impact and how much of a difference does RDNA 2 make? We don't know. I don't know. But I can give an educated guess and give a general ballpark. And we can look at the numbers across different things, different areas there. So what we do know, what we know is that RDNA 1 was in fact 25% better performance per clock. Or in other words, 25% higher IPC or instructions per clock. Okay, essentially that will equate to more performance per teraflop. 25%, which is pretty big, right? Coming from GCN. Okay. Now, AMD has said in general that we can expect to see similar gains go into RDNA 2. Now, I personally think that 25% from RDNA 1 to RDNA 2, these are both already new architectures. That's pretty significant. And I think that that's kind of a bit overzealous. So I'm not going to use 25%, okay? But just looking at past GPU architectures going from one gen to the next gen, typically we could expect to see realistically like at least 10%, like 10 to 15% IPC improvement is pretty common, right? If you look back at NVIDIA and AMD side, that's the general ballpark. It depends obviously on if it was a die node change and die shrinkage and other factors, but 10 to 15% is probably reasonable. I think absolute best case will probably be 20%, but I think that's even shooting a bit, overshooting a bit. So I could split the difference and say 15%, which is reasonable, and just more conservatively say about 10%, which I think is probably more than minimal that we could expect to see. If you go and look at my blog or the NeoGAF thread, you'll see that I actually broke down, and based on that 15% metric, I actually computed an equivalent teraflop rating for the PS5 GPU. In other words, like I said, you can't compare teraflops apples to apples because it doesn't work like that when it's different architectures. So the question is, how much does 10 teraflops of RDNA 2 equal in RDNA 1 terms or in GCN terms? Right? And I answered those questions. So I'll give you the result here. Okay? We can use the RDNA 1 terms to roughly compare to other RDNA 1 cards like the 5700 or the 5700 XT. We can use the GCN values to compare to a PS4 or a Radeon 7, for example. Now, we can't use any of those numbers to compare to NVIDIA because NVIDIA, whole different architecture, whole different world. And there's no way you can really directly compare AMD teraflop ratings to NVIDIA. So we're going to keep it on AMD terms for that reason. Now, the result is pretty much what I said here. If you look at it, 10.28 teraflops of RDNA 2 roughly equates, using the 15% metric, roughly equates to 12 teraflops of RDNA 1. And knowing the 25% IPC improvement that is documented by AMD, we can then take that 12 and convert that to an equivalent GCN ballpark teraflop number, and we get closer to 16 using the 15% mark. Now with that information, we can then look at, theoretically, just looking at the hardware, how much faster would a 12 teraflop RDNA 1 card be over a 5700 XT, which is at max roughly 10 teraflops, right? Or a 5700, which is at max roughly 8 teraflops, right? And we can then also look at the GCN numbers to compare to like a PS4, for example. So the PS5 in actual direct comparison terms, theoretically, is roughly 25% faster than a 5700 XT and roughly 50% faster than a 5700. Now those numbers come from just looking at the theoreticals, looking at the teraflop calculation, which is theoretical, but at least now we have it in terms where it's apples to apples in terms of architecture. Almost 9 times the graphic horsepower of the PS4. Everyone looks at it on the surface and they say 10 teraflops versus 1.8 teraflops, which is like 5.5. No, guys, it's not how it works. Okay, that 10 teraflops is absolutely not equatable to the 1.8 on the PS4. So in fact, and again, I told you how I'm doing this. This is ballpark. If I did it more conservatively and estimated 10%, I would still get somewhere around 15.5 teraflops GCN. But let's just say for even number like 16. So 16 teraflops of GCN equivalent power. Now the other thing to note here is that in the Road to PS5 talk, Mark Cerny himself actually gave us a nugget. He actually gave us an equivalent CU count in the PS5 compared to the PS4. In other words, the PS5 has 36 CUs, but he pointed out that each CU is way bigger than a PS4 CU. And in fact, in terms of total transistor count, there was the equivalent of 58 CUs in the PS5 if you assume that they were each the size of a PS4 CU, right? So in other words, if you were to talk specifically in PS4 terms, the PS5 has 58 CUs. 58 PS4 CUs, okay? So just do the math. If you actually extrapolate that out, and we already know the clock speed of the PS5 GPU at 2.23 gigahertz, we can get an actual estimated teraflop rating. And that number happens to be 16.5 teraflops, right? So that's based on the nugget that Mark Cerny himself came from Sony. It's pretty close to my estimate of 15%. In fact, I can use that 16.5 to really determine what that ratio is in terms of the RDNA 2 benefit. Now, granted, that number that Sony gave is not like obviously exact. It was really just meant to be a high-level abstraction. So I'm not going to take it literally, but it is poignant that it is very close to the numbers that I estimated at 15% improvement for IPC for RDNA 2, right? So we're in the 16 ballpark. I'm still going to stick with 16, okay, if you follow me. Those are theoreticals. So I want to put this more in the context of actual game data, actual real-world game data. Now, again, we already have a known entity in the RX 5700 that is extremely close to the PS5 and everything at a hardware level, except for clock speed and except for the actual architecture efficiency. So there's more features. We know ray tracing, other features that's obviously included on the PS5 GPU is clearly a better GPU. But in terms of looking at just raw performance, it's a great reference point. Okay, now let's start from here. That 50% that I mentioned was theoretical, based on the fact that we know that the clock speed is 30% faster, 35% faster actually, and also based on the 15% improvement, right, that I mentioned. That's how we get 50% roughly, right? Now, if we look at the actual real world performance of the RX 5700, and I'm gonna go to a great site to do that, called GPU Check. GPU Check is good because it gives a nice summary and comparison between different graphics cards, testing at all resolutions, 1080p, 1440p, ultra wide 1440p, and 4K. It gives an average aggregate of across, I don't even know the number of games. I think it's over 50 games, starting from 2019, going back to like 2016. And yeah, so it looks at all types of games, of course, all resolutions. You can see side by side, and it gives you an average difference and stuff like that. So I'm not going to look at everything. I'm going to look at basically the main hitters from 2019 and 2018. The list still winds up being about 25 games that I looked at here. And I can, and I'm going to focus on 4K because we know that the target is 4K. All the games were tested at max settings as well. But we know the target is 4K. So I'm going to focus on that. Now, we look at the RX 5700 in isolation. We can see, what that really looks like, right? And we see the numbers here at 4K Ultra. What GPU, what level of power can we expect from the PS5? The assumption has been a 2070 Super. Now, if you follow what I've been saying, let's forget for a minute. Remember, there's two key differences. There's the clock speed, frequency, and the architecture difference in RDNA 1 and RDNA 2. The RDNA 1 and RDNA 2 is less of a known entity, clearly. So let's exclude that for a minute, which is obviously wrong. It obviously is a difference. RDNA 2 is, in fact, going to be more efficient, meaning that it's going to have more performance within the same size and the same number of resources, etc. We know that. We don't know exactly how much, but there's no way it's going to be equal. There's no way it's going to be less. But for the sake of argument, just bear with me. Let's exclude that out the equation for a minute, okay? And just look at the PS5 as if it was an RX 5700, which it essentially is, that is just extremely overclocked by 30%, really 35%, but like I said, I'll just say 30%. What would 30% higher performance be over the 5700? If you took the 5700 performance across all of these games and just arbitrarily added 30%, what would that look like and where would we end up? Okay, let's just take a look. That's what I'm showing here. Okay, now if you look at this relative to the 5700, yeah, we just added 30%. Now, where do these numbers end up? Well, let's look at the RTX 2080 Super as I suggested. Well, here's those numbers. So when we look at that side by side, that's what we get across these 25 games. And we look at the average difference between adding 30%, which is conservative. If you heard what I said earlier, extremely conservative, I would say. But if we just arbitrarily did that and added 30% to the 5700, we wound up with a performance envelope that is within margin of error to the RTX 2080 Super. Now, of course, some games are going to be different. Some games are going to favor AMD architecture, and that's why you see like World War Z has like a much higher rating there for AMD. Some games are going to favor NVIDIA, which is like why Call of Duty Black Ops 4 is much lower on AMD side. We get it. So that's why we're looking at a larger number of games. We're doing an aggregate, average. And what do we get? We get that the PS5 is within 3% of the RTX 2080 Super. Let me not even say it's PS5. The 5700 plus 30% is within 3% of a 2080 Super. That is the conservative rating. Now we're looking at actual game performance. This is not the theory. This is not the theoreticals here. Okay, the actual game performance. The 5700 is a pretty decent card in terms of performance per dollar and per size. It punches above its weight with that little 8 teraflop GPU or 7 teraflop GPU. It's pretty performant, right? I mean, at 4K Ultra, it's still averaging 45 FPS in most recent games. That's not bad, right? That's not bad at all. If you look across this list here, it actually runs most games at over 30 FPS at 4K Ultra. Right, so I mean, it's no slouch, okay? But you add 30% to that, guys, and you wind up at 2080 Super level. There's no other way around it. This is just looking at the actual performance that is documented and out there. You tell me how. Now, for the sake of argument, let's look at what the actual real-world differences are between a 5700 and various other graphics cards like a RTX 2070. Okay, now here it is. You can see it clear as day right here. On average, and I have it here for the summary for all of it resolutions, but I've been focusing on 4K. The difference between an RX 5700 and an RTX 2070 is only 8%. only 8% on average. Some games, of course, might be higher, some games might be lower, but on average, it's 8%. Let's just round up to 10%. How, in God's name, can the PS5, not even accounting for RDNA 2 efficiencies, not even accounting for the fact that it's a closed box, which is generally more efficient, that the driver is usually much closer to the metal to get a higher performance, that Sony has optimized and added optimizations at the hardware level, like the GPU scrubbers that Cerny mentioned and other things as well. It has other features to make it even more efficient than RDNA 1. I'm not even accounting for those things that honestly should make it even more performant. Just looking at it in isolation, it is 30% faster than a 5700. How, in God's name, does that equate to only 10% of a difference? Let's look at it compared to the RTX 2070 Super. The 2070 Super compared to the 5700 is 13% at 4K. Let's round up and say 15%. How are you guys really going to sit here and explain to me that it's reasonable to expect that 30% overclock on the 5700 is somehow only going to yield you 10 to 15% more performance? 30%. Again, even if that number is inflated by a bit, even if it was 20%, even though it literally is 35%, but again, if that scale was not linear, let's cut it in half, almost, right? Roughly in half. That still is way above 10 to 15% that you would look at and see from an RTX 2070 or 2070 Super, right? And let's keep going. RTX 2080 on average, 20%. Like I said, even in the most conservative estimates, we're probably looking at about that ballpark, right? Excluding all the other optimizations, excluding the fact that it's a whole new, more efficient architecture, and somehow that the clock speed difference does not translate 100% linearly, 20% is still conservative, coming from 35% overclock, right? So that's still in the ballpark of RTX 2080. And then again, roughly on the RTX 2080 Super side, the difference is 25%. Now, the key is, let's get away from the theoretical, let's get away from the teraflops. Let's look at the games. The RX 5700 is out, and in a lot of ways, it's very close to a PS5. And if you could look at it, which you can't, it's wrong to do that. But if you could look at it in literal fashion, there is no way that you could tell me that overclocking a 5700 by 35% or 30% is somehow only going to yield you 10% more benefit in games. That doesn't make any sense, right? But again, it's not to be taken literal. So if we overclock it by 30% and then we get another 10% boost from the IPC, well, we're looking at something that's like 40% faster roughly, right? Than the raw RX 5700, theoretically, right? Now, when we do that and account for that, what do we get? Look at that. Average, we're now 4% faster than a 2080 Super. And in the best case scenario, which I don't think is completely far-fetched. Some of you guys are probably, oh my God, but if you listen to what I'm saying, I don't think it's completely far-fetched, right? I mean, there might be some other bottlenecks, of course, in the console. Again, we know that 448 gigabytes of memory is unified in the console. It's not just for the graphics card. We get that. But there are other things, a lot of other things actually in the console that, again, is more streamlined, is more optimized for gaming, that may or may not make up that difference. But yes, we know. I'm well aware that, there may be some other bottlenecks in the console space, which is why, again, okay, I'm not saying that this is probably like the sweet spot. So 40% is the sweet spot to me. 35 to 40%, I think, is kind of realistically where it would want to be. But I don't think this is far-fetched. This 50%, again, is literally looking at the 35% clock speed and assuming a 15% RDNA 2 benefit and efficiency. And if you do that, look at the numbers. We're like way over 2080 Super. We're now at 11, 12% on average, right? And guess what? That number actually is roughly in the ballpark of a 2080 Ti. Looking at a 2080 Super to a 2080 Ti, the difference is, generally speaking, roughly about 12 to 15%. So now we're looking at something that is actually closer to that. So just to scale it back, I'm not suggesting that. I think that that may be a bit higher when it's all said and done, when you add in a whole bunch of factors here. But please, if you heard me, if you follow me, just listen. Just tell me, how is it possible that the PS5 GPU is only roughly 10 to 15% faster than the RX 5700? Please tell me where I'm wrong. Please tell me where my analysis breaks down. Please tell me how I'm making no sense. But don't just come and just say because it's too good to be true or it's hard to believe. Listen to what I'm saying. It's not that hard to believe. It's pretty easy to believe. But if you have something to counter, please bring some data. Bring some evidence. And like I said, if you are a game developer or just someone who is really in the know and have seen the PS5 dev kit running games, running like existing current gen PC games that you could compare and just say like, look, yep, we're getting 60 FPS on the PC here on the RTX 2080, and we're only seeing 50 FPS on the PS5. Okay. Then again, the question would be, and I don't know if you would know this to help chime in here, but the question would be, well, where is it bottlenecked? There's something that's clearly bottlenecking that GPU in that system. It definitely should be much faster than that, as I'm showing. But if it's not, it's for a reason. I would love to know. Sony did a pretty amazing job, all said and done, in terms of cramming a lot into this box. And people have always initially underestimated the GPU from the jump. As soon as they heard 10 teraflops, they immediately, GPU is like underpowered, GPU is under this and under that. And they just don't get it, right? They just don't get it. They don't get the real world performance. They don't get the advantages of the high clock speed can bring to performance, stuff like that. Is the Xbox Series X GPU larger, bigger? Sure. Does it have more theoretical compute power? Absolutely. Okay, I'm not really getting. I mean, by this same analysis, the Xbox Series X would exceed a 2080 Ti, which I actually think it does. I submit that the PS5 and the Series X, in fact, their targets, theoretical targets in performance, is a 2080 Super and a 2080 Ti. So there it is, using real world game data. Hopefully it makes sense to you. Hopefully you enjoyed it. Please like, subscribe, get the word out. If you are part of anything or anybody who is into gaming, tell them to look at this video. Tell them that where these consoles are really coming in terms of power. It's pretty amazing from what I can tell. So that's all for now. Thanks a lot, guys. Appreciate it. Love you. Comment, like, subscribe. Till next time.